I'd definitely say, like, what distinguishes Cambridge specifically from maybe other universities, and what I've always seen as like the biggest privilege of doing a degree here, is the supervision system, which I think is really, really different and quite daunting at first. I remember when I first arrived thinking, wow, I've just written my first university level essay, and now a professional is going to basically grade me on it for an hour. But that's not how it is. It's a lot more productive, I think, I found anyway, and a lot more kind of welcoming and creative and appreciative than I expected it to be.
You have to get accustomed to receiving quite intense feedback. And we were just talking about how criticism and critique are good things. But it's all about honing the skills. And I mean, from a supervisor's perspective, I would also say that it's about gaining strength in speaking about ideas coherently. So you practice writing about them. We talk about how to write. I'm always saying to my supervisees, this is you developing as writers. But then the supervision is also this oral discussion where you develop as speakers. Which is, it's a lot.
And then again, it's about being able to like defend your viewpoint, like on the spot, like having it really kind of criticised, not in a bad way, but just like to make sure that you are able to have that like argument.
Essentially, in almost all supervisions, you hand in a piece of written work beforehand, and it forms a basis for discussion, but it's not assessed as part of your degree.
But I quite like that, because it kind of means you can be brave and bold in the essays that you write. There's no one in advance giving you a certain path to go down, or kind of creating a fence, or even a vague sort of idea. It's completely up to you, which obviously is frightening, but at the same time it's really inspiring. Because if you have a supervisor that you get along with especially, which so far I've been really lucky to have, you then have the discussion about different choices you could have made. I had 2 supervisions that surprised me for a specific reason. They were basically back to back, and they were on 2 different texts. One of them was on a medieval book with Carcel and another one was on, I think, some short stories. And I think the main thing that surprised me was, and that kind of taught me a lot about the supervision system, is I had so much confidence in one of these essays and how it would be received. And I honestly did think, you know what, I've written some weak essays, but this is the one where I've really, shown my best. And then another essay where, I felt like it was quite rushed, and I just didn't feel, as inspired as I thought I should be. I didn't feel like I'd collected the amount of resources I should have. And I sort of decided very kind of adamantly, this is how the supervisor will, receive these 2 essays. This supervision's going to go well, this one probably isn't. That's fine. And I found it really interesting that the supervisions kind of went completely differently to how I expected. It was the complete opposite. And this one essay I had really doubted, I was told was really special, especially for a first year, and that I had taken a really unique perspective. While the other one, I was told, you've taken a very controversial kind of path here, and you haven't quite managed to prove why. And I think because I was a new pupil and I was trying to kind of impress as much as I could, I thought because I had written in a certain tone that would be enough to impress the supervisor, when actually the other essay where I think I had just been a bit more authentic and I hadn't overthought things, and I had just, just taken a bit more of an authentic approach. Perhaps partly because I didn't overwork massively and I gave myself the time to think, actually ended up being a really good supervision where we were able to have loads of good conversations, and I left it feeling really proud. And that was quite early on. And I think that kind of positively defined the rest of my experiences with supervisions, that, every kind of essay that I'm creating, you just don't know how it's going to be received, and that's okay.
You gave really good advice of that by the time it gets to exams, you'll be so surprised that you can do it. You'll sit there and you can do it. And I did not believe that at the time, and I was just keep on working it. I'll keep on working it, but it's true. You get there, and regardless of if you thought that the work that you've done is not good enough, there's always some spark. There's always something in it that shows that you've made progress from your last one, and you don't always see the progress. Kind of weeks go by so fast. It's kind of I don't know if I'm keeping up and things like that. But then you look back and it's gone so much better than you thought you have, and you've grown a lot.
A moment that sort of sticks out for me is a supervision I had this year about a text, and this is something that just came up during the supervision, like a thought that I had about a particular like image that like was consistent through both texts.
Do you remember what the image was?
It was like, because it was text about the Mexican Revolution. And it was the image of like ashes and like dust and like this sort of remnants of something that has once been there. And I sort of said this the very spur of the moment thing, like it's something that only comes to me in the supervision. And the supervisor says like, that's really, I've never heard that before. Like that's really unique. I'm gonna like use that for, when I set the questions next year. I'm gonna use that.
Amazing.
And it's like you think when you're going into these supervisions, not only are you faced with these like great works of literature which have been studied for decades or centuries, but you're also with a supervisor who has been supervising on these same texts for a long time, and so you do kind of potentially think that there's nothing that you can say that is unique. They'll have heard of everything before. They will, they'll know exactly what you're going to say. But actually, you'll find that sometimes, there is something still unique to be said about these texts.
How do you find the pace of work? Would you say it's a total positive, or are there some challenges to the system?
I would say there's challenges in the sense that I think supervision-wise, so for the literature as aspect of the course, at least in me doing a post-A-level in ab initio language, it's very well balanced. It's just keeping up with that, with how much vocab work, how much general grammar, having to do practice for translation. There's other aspects of the course that take up a lot more time and energy than you think they would. And so you have to be very proactive in planning and getting started early and stuff. And I can even say, like, I'm the kind of person who kind of struggles to initially get going and initially have the ideas. And it means that sometimes when it comes to my essays, I started them much later and I've started panicking about it. But it eventually gets done, and if something's wrong, if you feel like you can't finish it off and things like that, it's not the end of the world.
No.
It's because when you come to supervision, you get out of it what you put in, and even if you've managed to come up with some ideas, there's always something to discuss.
Yeah.
So the pace of work, it's manageable, but I would personally say that for next year, I'm most definitely starting every single essay I do much earlier.
Yeah.
It's a good aim.
Very good.
Yeah.
The process of collecting resources and writing an essay and going to supervision every single week, I do think there's a reason the terms are shorter here, because a momentum sort of forms and it keeps you going, and if you stay on top of it, it can be a really enjoyable experience. But every single student here has had weeks or kind of periods of a few weeks where they perhaps haven't been able to stay completely on top of that. And I found that, if I communicate well and, explain my position, my supervisor will trust my integrity and how hard I've been working. As you were sort of saying, and you've now experienced, twice the amount of time at Cambridge that we have.
And twice the amount of work, probably.
Yeah, exactly. The last year. I look forward to, like you were saying, just organising myself a little bit differently. Definitely doing more reading over summer in advance, which I think is more of a key than I thought it would have been.
That's part of the learning curve.
Exactly. Do your reading. It's very important and very enjoyable.
Very helpful.
You're studying MML because you love it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons to learn there.
What is it about her style of writing that gives you this impression of confidence and of kind of confrontation?
She just says things like very, like it says that it is a certain way, not that it might be or that I think it's a certain way, but that it is this way. She's very assertive in that way.
Right.
Like just the way that the sentences are written. It's very absolute and like it's very sure, I suppose.
We did read M. Césaire and his discourse on colonialism, and he was very, very direct. He used the I a lot, and you could tell he was angry. He had a lot of passion. I think that's an instant one that comes to mind that we did this year.
Yeah, that's a really great thing to bring up in comparison as well, because they're writing at a really similar time, and yet, where they overlap and where they don't is really, really interesting to pursue. Thus, as against the dispersed, contingent and multiple existences of actual women, mythical thought opposes the eternal feminine, unique and changeless. So what categories are we dealing with there in terms of gender? Dylan?
I suppose the like eternalness of women, like the timelessness of this idea of women versus maybe like the sort of changing nature of men, like how like they're allowed to be different depending on the time that they live it, whereas like there is this one idea of women which has persisted.
But is that what she's actually... Yeah, we're getting to that. But is that what she's actually saying here? The existences of actual women against those mythical thought opposes the eternal feminine.
Yeah.
So...
Again, there's the sort of the disconnect between the actual lived experience of what women are like versus the perceived expectation of what they should be like, of what the feminine should be like.
Yes. So what are the key terms there, like about that categorise gender? On the one hand, you've got actual, what did you say?
Women.
Like
Women.
And then you have the feminine.
Yes.
Which are two different things.
Yes.
And she kind of recognises
Exactly.
them not as being synonymous, but rather one being created and imposed and perhaps in the mind's eye associated with, and the other being material and real.
Another thing that we'll talk about in the future is how she's been criticised.
Yeah.
And that might also be part of the point. We started off talking about how she's very direct,
Yeah.
and she's making big claims, and that's a kind of part of the genre. And that also might be kind of something that she's giving, giving kind of the discursive world to work with in future. And I think this question of the woman versus the feminine, the man versus the masculine, are key. That she doesn't invent these, obviously, which she's not claiming that she does, but the way that she's using them are key resources for later work. That to go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, it's like what readers can get out of this.